Welcome to the Father Jim Clark Show. Father Jim Clark Show. Here on Heaven's Road FM. The only place to go for Catholic radio. Be blessed. Be blessed. Be entertained. Be entertained. Be welcome. Be welcome.
Bit of dramatic music there, because this is... So today I want to talk about the report from the recent meeting on the family, the Synod on the family. Now, I've made a couple of shows about this recently. I did one after the first meeting, and I did one after just before the second meeting. And at that point, I was not aware how long these meetings were going to go on. I don't think I'd read anywhere where they had said there were going to be 2, 3, 4, or 5 meetings. So in the last radio show I made, I kind of put a plea out there to let the meetings carry on, however long they took, and let's wait for the report. Well, of course, the report is here. So, first of all, this morning I need to ask or beg your indulgence for my poor old voice. I'm just getting over this chest infection that's going around that a lot of people seem to have. But I hope you can put up with it. I didn't want to wait another couple of days until I'm completely better, because I thought it was important that I put something together as soon as possible on the back of the release of the report. Now, if you want to read the report, you can find it online. I'm sure if you just type in, I can't remember what I typed in, Synod on the family, and you will find a report. If you can't find it, you can go to my website, my parish website, which is saintannesorchurch.co.uk, and on the banner at the top it's got its own little snippet on the banner, and it's called the Synod on the Family, and the whole report is there. Now, I ran it off in a 4 version. There's about, 25 sides of it maybe. It's quite long. Let me tell you how many paragraphs there are in it. There are 62 paragraphs. So if you take it a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs at a time, it is readable. It's not the most difficult thing in the world, although I must admit, one of the kind of upsets that I have right at the beginning with the report is some of the language that they use seems to be a little bit overflowing. I never really know why they do this. Let me just read you. This is the second half of the opening paragraph. Evening falls on our assembly. It is the hour at which one willingly returns home to meet at the same table in the depth of affection, of the good that has been done and received, of the encounters which warms the heart and makes it glow, good wine which hastens the unending feast of the days of man. It is also the weightiest hour of one who finds himself face to face with his own loneliness, in the bitter twilight of shattered dreams and broken plans. How many people trudge through the day in the blind alley of resignation, of abandonment, even resentment? In how many homes the wine of joy has been less plentiful, and therefore also the zest, the very wisdom of life? Let us make our prayer heard for one another this evening. A prayer for all. Normal people don't speak like this. So why the Vatican Fathers think that they have to make everything sound so poetic? And don't forget, that is on the first paragraph of the report. And I think if anything's going to put people off reading it, it is using that kind of flowery, poetic language. So, the language aside, what do I think of the document? Well, I think the document is an extremely good document. I do think it's lacking in various areas, but I'll get to that as we go along. One of the things that I am delighted with is that from reading the document, it's very obvious that the group that met as the Synod were not influenced by the media. Because, of course, as I said in the previous radio show about this, the media had kind of squashed all of the meeting into two issues: divorced and remarried receiving Holy Communion, and the situation about homosexuals and gay marriage, which they have not been led down the road. I mean, it is mentioned, of course, but I'll get to that in a little while. So, like I said, it's fairly long, but it's very... Excuse the paper as I keep turning this over. It is very much worth a read, because if you don't read it, then you are going to be led by what the media are saying. And quite often, what I've heard from the media just is not in the report. You know, they love to skew things. So let me have a little look. It talks about, in paragraph 4, about the dignity of the family, and everything revolves around the dignity of the family. Now, it does talk about the historical and religious sense of what a family is. So, you know, these kind of things need to be taken into consideration. You do really need to read this with a Catholic sensibility, really. There's a couple of things that I've underlined here. One of the things that the fathers who met obviously saw that there was that we live now in a world of, as they say, troubling individualism, which deforms family bonds and ends up considering each component of the family as an isolated unit, leading in some cases to the idea that a person is formed according to one's own desires, which are considered absolute. Now, the fathers go on to talk about that absolutely not being the case. Of course, there are quotes from scriptures, and one of the things really that comes across is that they're trying to say, you know, when two people are prepared to commit to each other in marriage, what they are actually doing is putting their own self, their own individual person, to the back. So to the fore comes your concern now for your spouse. And in a true, happy and loving relationship, that is what happens. They do come out with some very interesting things. There is quite a lot in the report about the role of women. They talk about equality of women. They talk about equality of women in all aspects of life. But they also note that there still is some prejudice against women. They say in paragraph 8, in fact, in many places today, simply being a woman is a source of discrimination, and the gift of motherhood is often penalised rather than esteemed. Now, I've written next to that, I don't think I've ever really heard this said in that way before, and I do think that's a really important thing. And at the end of that paragraph, that paragraph goes on to talk about sexual exploitation of children. It talks about huge problems that we have in our big cities, where, you know, we have street children they seem to have been abandoned. They have no parents, that they're living from hand to mouth. And they say right at the bottom of that paragraph, migration is another sign of the times to be faced and understood in terms of its onerous consequences to family life. So the fact that people are migrating is changing the way families live together, stay together, the cohesion that is normally within a family. Migration that we have these days is having an effect on that. And that is something, again, it's never really occurred to me, but I think that there is a real element of truth in that, and it's something that we need to perhaps keep in the forefront of our mind, especially, we who live in Europe, when we see these borders all taken down now in this great European family that we're supposed to live in. Borders without frontiers, it's good in one sense, but I do think that the fathers of the Synod are correct, that it is having an effect on family, because usually when people say move from the continent to Britain, they are attracted to the big cities, and city living has an enormous effect on life as a family. I think that one of the things that has become very clear indeed is the fact that when you talk about the family, and maybe especially in our modern world, it is an incredibly complex thing. And I think that is what the Synod Fathers have kind of tried to get in touch with. Now, there is a problem, of course. Whenever you bring together a set of people, what happens is, especially in the West, obviously these people have met in Rome, we do tend to be blinkered at looking at things like, well, anything really, but like the family, from our own point of view. Okay, so I'm living in the UK, I live in England, I live in a very affluent area in Manchester, and as far as the rest of the world is concerned, it would be very easy to be blinkered here and to look at teachings on homosexuality, the divorced and remarried, from a very Western media-led situation. But for those of you who are regular listeners to my show, you'll know that I have a vested interest in an orphanage in Kenya. And it's when I go to Kenya that you begin to see the world from a slightly different perspective, a slightly different point of view. And when you are looking at something like the Synod on the Family, you need to look at, yes, the wealthy part of the world, the middle bit of the world that's doing okay, and the poor area of the world. And, if you bring all of that together on top of what is already quite a complex thing, the family, then you are indeed dealing with something very complex indeed. The reason I've stated that is because in, where are we? Paragraph 13, right at the end, in the Christian life, the reception of baptism brings the believer into the church, that's church with a big C, through the domestic church, that's with a small c, namely the family, a dynamic process which develops, one which advances gradually with the progressive integration of the gifts from God, in an ongoing conversation to a love which saves us from sin and gives us the fullness of life. Now then, I need to go back to the problem of language, because that little bit I've just read is not flowery language as such, but it's more academic, theological language. Again, most of that style of language is outside of the remit of most believers. So basically what it's saying is, so in the Christian life, so within all those who believe, the reception of somebody into the church, i.e. somebody who goes through baptism, it brings that individual into the church through the domestic church. So rather than the church worldwide as the family, that person's brought in, say, from me baptising them in my domestic church. You're brought into what is the family of the worldwide church. Thus beginning, it says, a dynamic process which develops, one which advances gradually with the progressive integration of the gifts of God. So what's that saying? Well, it's kind of saying that when you're baptised, as you then begin to grow into the church, to begin to understand more of the way the church works, the way the church is, your whole person develops progressively because of the gifts of God. Is that